So hi, my name is Morgan, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in 2022. And I read 24 books this past year, which I have watched a lot of like the book talk YouTubers, and they're like, I've read 100 something books this year, which I think is insane. I don't know how they did it, but I read 24 books this year, and I was really excited because I have not been into reading in such a long time. I used to be a huge reader, especially in high school. My favorite authors were Cassandra Clare and Rainbow Rowell, and I like read her books religiously. Now like Cassandra Clare has like 18 million books in the series, and I don't even know what's happening anymore. But in 2021, I wanted to get back into reading, and there were some books I like would start and like didn't finish. And the reason I got back into reading was because of my best friend Jordy. She was like, you have to read this book. It's the best book ever. You're gonna love it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. And I bought the book, and then I didn't read it for 6 months. I was just like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Well, last December I started reading it, and I finished it at the very beginning of the year. And ever since I read that book, I was obsessed, and it kicked off my love for reading again. And that book is A Court of Thorns and Roses. I feel like that story is the same for everybody, where everybody's like, oh, I was in such a reading slump, and then I picked up this book, and then I fell in love with reading again, and then they read like a million fantasy books after that, and that is so true for me as well. This book is, and the whole entire series is 5 stars. I have never loved a series quite like I have loved this series. Just a forewarning, if I do say any spoilers, I will put on the screen that I'm gonna spoil something, so you don't have to worry about any books I talk about. I won't outright spoil it for you, because I hope if you watch this video, then you might think, oh hey, I would have loved to read that book, and then you do it and you have a great time reading it and not have it spoiled for you here and now. So anyway, the premise of this series is there's a girl, and she lives with her 2 sisters and her father, and they're extremely poor, and she goes out into the forest and hunts for them, and she kills a wolf. And this isn't a spoiler, I'm pretty sure it's like on the back of the book, but she kills a wolf, and there's like a wall, an invisible wall, and above the forest, and above it is all the Fae realms. And the wolf she killed actually turned out to be Fae, and so as punishment she had to be taken across the wall to the Fae world. And there's Sarah J Maas, who I'm obsessed with. She really sets it up at the beginning that Fae are really bad, that they're evil, and so you're like, what's gonna happen when she gets to the other side? And the story that unfolds from there is nothing that I could have ever thought would happen. This book is kind of like a Beauty and the Beast-ish retelling-ish. The ending was insane, and by the time you get to the second book, which is my all-time favorite, well, maybe all-time favorite in the series, maybe my second favorite in the series, it really takes a whole turn where you really dive deep into the world. The characters are amazing. I believe the reason why I love most of Sarah J Maas's writing, not just in this book but in all of her series, she writes about really strong women, and not just very stagnant. They grow a lot. This is actually probably a great segue into, this one is my favorite that she wrote in the ACOTAR series. You can kind of see it's very well loved by me, and that is A Court of Silver Flames. The reason why I love this book so much is because it takes one of the characters that you meet in the very first book, and you actually hate her so much, and you go through the 4 books, I guess technically 3.5, because there's like, it's the first, second, and third, and then a novella in this book, and the growth that she has is amazing. Nesta is her name, and it was the most relatable character I've ever read about. It was kind of crazy to think of someone that I disliked so much at the beginning, and then when you got inside her head, she was so relatable, and just really amazing to see her on this journey throughout this whole book. So 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much. So highly recommend it. That is my favorite. And it took me a long time to get through all of these books, but that was kind of how I kickstarted my year off, was with ACOTAR. And at the same time that all of that is happening, I joined a book club with some of my friends, and they picked for us to read was the Zodiac Academy. And I can show you what it looks like. It looks like this. We read the Zodiac Academy, and since I was still like very fresh and new into getting back into reading, I was like, there's no way I can read ACOTAR and like be physically reading it, and also this series, because this series is also huge. It's still an ongoing series, just like ACOTAR. I believe there's 7 or 8 books, and they're thick boys. And to give you an idea of my feelings about this book, my Goodreads review, I believe, was 1 star. The only good thing about this book is when it finally ended. And then you would think, okay, Morgan, you really hated the first one. You would let the suffering in there. That's not the case. I proceeded to read all 6 books so far. There's 7. There's actually 7 books, sorry. Listen to all 6 books, because someone else in the book club was like, oh, I know the first one's so bad, it gets so good at book 5. And I think if any series you have to say it gets really good by book 5, you should just give up on it. I don't know why I did it. I feel like when I start a series, I feel like I really want to finish it just to kind of see what happens. So to kind of give you an idea what the story is, it's about these twin girls. They live in the human world, and you get like 2 chapters to get to know them, because they go from one person's point of view to the other one. I believe it's, what are their names? I've spent so much time with them, you think I'd remember their names, but I don't. Anyway, and then this professor comes and whisks them off away to the Fey world, because it turns out they are heirs to the throne. They're the princesses, the future queens of the Fey realm. And of course, when you're queens of the Fey realm, you have to go to quote-unquote high school, but I'm pretty sure they were older than 18, so college, I guess. But it feels very high school-esque, and you have an awakening for your powers, and guess what? They have all the powers you could have, and they go through school. I've never read a bully romance, and found out I hate bully romances from this book. But I will have to, the redeeming factors, because so many people actually really enjoy these books. I don't want to like completely hate on something that a lot of people enjoy. It's just not something that I enjoyed, but they are likable characters. I think that's why it kept me going, is because I really loved Darius a lot. I think that's what kept me going. I also really liked Caleb. Besides that, the story is like lackluster. I feel like the author didn't really know where she's going with it. It's actually not just one author, it's 2. So maybe they don't talk. I don't know, because going from Sarah J. Maas, where I feel like a lot of her foreshadowing is very well thought out. You don't even know it's foreshadowing when you get this one detail, and then like books later it comes back up. And I really enjoy that, because I feel like she really thought about the series and where it was going. With this, that's not the case. It's like, here's a problem, here's another problem, here's another problem, and they keep adding more problems, and they're like, oh crap, I need to like fix this one that we started so long ago, and they fix it with this random thing that happens. This is spoilers, but I think in book 4 or 5, like not Darcy, I can't remember the other one's name. One of the girls and Darius are like star-crossed mates or whatever. They can't be near each other. There's all these other bonding things happening that were put against their will. There's like a lot of weird things. And the only way it got solved was because Darius had to go to this temple that has never been talked about in the 5 books, and has to make a deal with the stars to save everyone. And it saves everyone and takes away all these curses, but somehow, because since Darcy's fighting the Shadow Princess and she gets cursed during that time, it didn't take away that, which isn't a problem in the next book. It's just like, it's not really well thought out. The writing's not that great. There are likable characters. There is a lot of smut in this book, so if you don't really want to read about that, don't read this series, and it's kind of crazy. And yeah, I actually calculated how much I listened to this book, because the first book is 12 hours of listening to, which I think is pretty average for a book. And you're like, okay. And the next one is 15. You're like, okay, like that's a lot of time, but you know, pretty normal. Third book, 17 hours. By the fourth book, it is 21 hours of just listening to one book, and it keeps going on from there. So book 5 and 6 are 26 hours of just listening to it. And it's not that, like, I don't want you guys to read this book. I spent almost 120 hours of just listening to it. I'm not even done with the series. I'll finish it. I still have to finish book 7 and then go on to book 8 because I want to know what happens. I don't know. And there's a book 9 coming out, but it's not great. Yeah, just don't do it. Save yourself. Okay, so next what I read this year was Crescent City by also Sarah J. Maas. You'll see the theme of this video is this year was like my Sarah J. Maas year. I literally read all of her books that she's ever published. So next I read was Crescent City because in February of this past year, she released the second book in this series, and so many people were freaking out about it. And some people were actually posting what the ending was of the second book, and it was really insane. Crescent City, another 5 out of 5 stars. I extremely enjoyed this book. I will have to say, she's thick, and she kind of drags on a little bit at the beginning because there's a lot of world building. It's extremely necessary for this book, but it is a lot. It can get confusing. I did have to like reread a lot of parts to understand what's happening, but totally worth it. The second book is also the same. It's also, I can pull it right here. It's also extremely thick. This one's all nice and pretty because I bought a second one because Sunny actually ate the first one that I had, so I bought a replacement. But amazing book. What the premise is it's about 2 best friends, and again, strong women characters. They're kind of different, and I don't even know how to like describe this book without spoiling it. It's like a modern day fairy tale where everything that has ever been a fairy tale is in this book. Like there's fae, there's mermaid people, there's vampires, there's all these different types of like fantasy elements all in one. And there's a bunch of different rivalries, and I really can't tell you the premise of the book without completely ruining it. The like shock at the beginning of it, so I'm not going to tell you. I just want you to trust me that you should read this book. I really enjoyed it. It's probably, it is my least favorite series out of all of the 3 series that she has released, only because this is like modern day. They have cell phones, and I hate that about books. When I'm reading a book, I don't want anything modern day about it. I like super old fantasy because when I read, I'm like escaping from the world, so I don't want to read about people being on their phones and like modern day technology. I just want to read like where they're in a castle and there's no electricity, pretty much. So anyway, amazing book. Again, highly suggest it. So and both of them were 5 stars. You can see like they're just so thick. That's a lot of her books are. I put this book here because and the next book I read this year was a Collen Hoover book, and I hated it viscerally with everything in my body. So let me just like take you on the journey of me learning about Collen Hoover. Collen Hoover is extremely popular on Book Talk. You will see a ton of people talking about it. And so last summer when I was like trying to get back into reading, I went to Barnes & Noble, and I actually went up to like where I thought she would be, and Ryan was like, oh, like what book are you looking for? And this girl, and I said, I'm looking for a Collen Hoover book. And this random girl that did not work at Barnes & Noble came up to me and she's like, oh my gosh, I love Collen Hoover. You're gonna love this. You should read this book, Hopeless. This was hopelessly bad. It's about a girl who went to like was homeschooled, and then she went to real high school the last year, and there's this guy who's like a bad boy. He starts following her on friends, and I thought it was really icky, and I didn't like it, and I just stopped reading it. And I was like, this book really sucked. And then I heard how much everybody loved two of Collen Hoover's books. There was Verity, and then there was It Ends With Us. So let's start off with the positive. Let's be positive. The next book I read was Verity. Trigger warning. Trigger warning everything. This book is about a writer who is asked to ghostwrite for another very popular author because she was in a car accident and is now in a coma. So just spoilers all ahead for this book. I just to let you know, I don't recommend you reading this book if you have children, especially if you have young children. Don't read this book. It can be very gross at times. So basically, she takes this job to be a ghostwriter for this author who writes very extremely dark books, and she lives in their house with the woman, the author that's in a coma, and her husband and their son. And basically the author and the husband start hooking up, and while she's like ghostwriting this book, she finds the wife's manuscript or like diary, kind of talking about her life, and you find out that she is a very evil woman, and that basically like she murdered her own child, but like so many other horrible things happened before then. It's really graphic and not very enjoyable to read. Or reading part of the manuscript, and then you go back into like what's happening in present day, so you don't know the full story yet, and then you kind of start being creeped out by the woman in the coma, and you're like, is she actually in a coma? All this stuff. Another spoiler warning. Turns out she was never in a coma. She was faking it the entire time. At the very end of the book, the woman tells the husband that she found the manuscript. He reads it, and then he murders his wife. And he actually had already read the manuscript before, and the reason why she's in a coma is because she was in a car accident, and he set up the car accident. And the only reason why he killed her or tried to kill her again is because he found out that she was faking this whole time being in a coma, and he was like taking care of her. But I was like, if you try to kill her, why'd you even try to take care of her? I guess maybe not to be caught by the cops or whatever. And then he kills her and was successful the second time. And then at the very end of the book, the writer marries the husband, and they have a baby. It's weird. Interesting, but weird. And I was like, okay. And this is Collen Hoover's only like non-romance book, even though there is elements of romance in it. So I was like, okay. Everybody really loves her. Like, this woman outsold the Bible last year. Outsold the Bible just from all of her books. Not just from one of them, but from all of them. And she has a lot of them, and too many, if you ask me. So the next book I read was her like most like highly rated book. Like, everybody talks about it, and It Ends With Us. So this book is about a girl who meets this guy, and like they fall in love, and turns out that he's not the guy that she thought he was. And then there's like flashbacks to her when she was in high school and with another guy. So I don't want to be too hard on this book, because when you finish reading it, you get to the author's note, and you find out that this was kind of like a love letter book to her mom, because her mom went through a very abusive relationship. So everything I say after this is going to be spoilers. So if you want to read this book, don't suggest it. Just keep that in mind. So the reason why I don't suggest this book is because, one, it's really poorly written. Just to give you an idea of how bad this book is, the main character's name is Lily Blossom Bloom, and she opens a flower shop. Not any kind of flower shop, but a gothic flower shop. All the flashbacks aren't done through like oh, there's a chapter, and then you're like, oh, it's a flashback to wherever time. It's actually her rereading letters that she wrote in high school. And you would think, oh, maybe it's like a diary, she's writing it to herself. Maybe she doesn't even like put like to who. No, she is writing these letters to none other than Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah. So there's that. This is the only book, I'm trying to give it like redeeming factors. This is the only book where the woman leaves the man because they're abusive. All of her other books, though, the men are abusive, but they stay with them. Another part that I didn't like is that the woman always has to be saved by a man. She was trying to get out of this relationship, and she actually runs back to the guy that she was in love with in high school, and he just happens to be like an amazing chef and has like a ton of money. I don't know. This book was horrible. I probably explained it really bad, but it's not great. None of Colleen Hoover's books are great. There's not really empowered women. There's not really any elements of a good plot line. It's really boring. There's always horrible men in it, and there's never a good idea for a relationship. And I think part of the reason why I don't like these books so much is because I believe her primary audience is young women, and if someone has never been in a relationship or doesn't really know what real love looks like, and then they read a book like this book or any of her other books, they might think that abuse is okay when it's not. So yeah, don't recommend. Sorry that got so deep and so bleh, but yeah, don't recommend reading any of her books, but it is probably the better one of most of them. So next, moving on, the next book I read was, I guess, keeping on theme with like really dark, but this one was actually a really good book. It was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So I grew up in Nickelodeon prime time of like iCarly and Victorious and all of that good stuff. So I loved iCarly. I watched that show all the time. So when I heard that Jeanette McCurdy, who plays Sam in iCarly, wrote a book, I was like, oh, I have to read this. And this book is really sad, but I think it's really important to read. It talks about like her like time in Hollywood and her growing up and becoming an actor, and like how her mom treated her. This book is really good. I really enjoyed it. I rated it 5 stars. I actually listened to this book on Audible, which I highly recommend because Jeanette McCurdy is actually reading it herself. So she really does a great job voice acting. You can see how emotional she is at some points in the book. So 10 out of 10, definitely give it a read. But the next book I read was Second Skin by Christian White. This book was okay. It was 3 stars. I mean, I don't exactly recommend it. It wasn't horrible, but yeah, it's just there. But the next book I read this year that I really enjoyed, so to kind of give you an idea, in my timeline of the year, I'm now like September, October-ish. I've been reading all of these books, and now we're like towards the end of the year. And I read Fantastic Land by Mike Bach-Ubben. Probably saying that wrong, but Fantastic Land was fantastic. I think I rated this 4 stars. Oh yeah, I rated it 4 stars. I bought this book at Barnes & Noble, and while I was checking out, the girl was like, hey, I know you're buying this book, but you should definitely listen to it on Audible. And I started reading it, and then I took her advice and I listened to it on Audible, and that's how you should read this book too. So this book is about how there is this huge adventure park, kind of like Disneyland-esque, just like tons of rides. There's different themes for different areas of the park, and it's set in Florida, and a hurricane is coming. And they hire all these people to stay there to watch over the park while the hurricane hits, and they don't think it's going to be that bad, but the hurricane was horrible. And rescue didn't come for a really long time because the people that own Fantastic Land were like, hey, we have a lot of food and a lot of water. They should be fine. And so each chapter is from a different person's perspective, and you kind of have to piece together the story, and it's done in an amazing way. The voice actors were incredible, so definitely recommend listening to it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It kind of got me into the spooky vibe. I was really trying to read books that were kind of like on theme for the year, That was like my idea, and that didn't happen. You'll see later. But I did keep on with the spooky vibe because after I listened to that, I listened to Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Kaw. I'm probably saying all these names wrong, which I'm really sorry. This is a really, really short read. If you ever saw in person, it's like that big. It's like a 2-hour listen, and I rated it 1 star. I really did not like this book at all. I probably just figured out that I don't like horror and gore. It's not because of anything that the author really did wrong necessarily. I guess it's about a group of people that go into this haunted place, this haunted house, because 2 people want to get married there. The bride's dream was to always get married in a haunted house, and guess what? They get haunted, and all these crazy things happen. It's extremely gory and very descriptive, to the point where the descriptions are like kind of dumb. It's like it didn't make any sense why she was describing so many things so detailed. And yeah, I hated it. I wouldn't never want to recommend that to anyone ever again. So next, what I read or listened to, and this is probably where I have like no right to say that like Collen Hoover's books are like toxic and like show like a bad idea of a relationship, because I read A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. In this book, between the Collen Hoover books and then this book, I never ever want to trust book talk ever again. I think collectively there's just like a bad recommendations there. But A Touch of Darkness is about, it's a Hades and Persephone retelling in modern day time, and basically Hades is kind of runs this gambling place, and she goes to his club and makes a deal with him, and the whole book is about how she has to like keep this deal for him. So I rated it 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but only because I was listening to it and I thought it was kind of funny in that kind of way, not because it was good. She makes this deal with Hades, and she's like trying to solve this problem while she's also trying to be Persephone, living in disguise as a human, and like be a writer. And then this other problem pops up, and then this other problem pops up, and you really see that this writer just gives the main character all these issues to deal with, but she doesn't actually deal with the issues. She just keeps like doing it with Hades, because this whole book is just like pure smut. It's just that, pretty much. And not till the very end is when she deals with the issue. This is a trilogy. I haven't finished it. I've read the first and second book. The second book was god awful. I really hated it, especially because I believe in my first notes, and I have it on my Goodreads, but I said something like, she's a really bad friend. She's really selfish. The whole purpose of her roommate living with her was just like to support her. She like leaves her best friend at the club twice unattended, which is like not cool. And then she is just really she's a really shallow character. She has like no growth. And then in the second book, spoilers, in the second book, her best friend, the roommate, gets hit by a car and like is going to pass away. And so Persephone is trying to make all these deals with different gods to keep her alive. Well, this is trigger warning of suicide, but like she successfully gets her friend to be alive, but she had already accepted her soul had already accepted the death, so she didn't want to be alive anymore, so she killed herself. And then obviously she has to go to the underworld, and Persephone meets her at the underworld, and she was like, my whole life purpose was to be your friend. And I was like, that kind of sucks, because if your whole life purpose was to be this person's friend who wasn't even a good friend to you until like trying to save your life, but also wasn't doing you a favor, because like you'll see in the book that you can tell that like her soul didn't want to be saved. It was just kind of weird. Did not enjoy it at all on the second book. I'm on the third book, which seems like a little bit more enjoyable. But I liked the first one decent enough where I rated it 3 stars. I kind of thought it was funny. So that was the last book I listened to, and I saved the best for last, and that is Throne of Glass. I'm not actually done with the series. Sorry, this is another Sarah J. Maas book. Shocker. I am obsessed with this series. I'm not finished with it. I actually finished these last 2 books right at the beginning of the year, so I've read 5 of the books in this 8 book series, and it's incredible. It is about a girl who was an assassin. She is caught and is sent to work in the mines, and she's there for like a couple years, and then the prince comes and asks her to be in a competition on his behalf to find the next king's hand. And all these like kingsmen have like gotten all these different types of like thieves and other assassins and all these other kinds of people and like soldiers to be in this competition to find the next king's hand. And just like every other Sarah J. Maas book, you think it's one thing and it's a completely different thing, and it's incredible. I have loved it. I read it in the way like TikTok told me to read it because it's kind of weird. This is the first book in the series, Throne of Glass. There is a prequel, and I actually suggest reading the prequel first, because when you read Throne of Glass first, you kind of know, you find out some things that have happened, and then the prequel is kind of slower and harder to get through because you know a lot of those things. It has a lot of important plot points, but one of the biggest plot points that it had like no emotional effect on me because I was so obsessed with the characters in this book that I didn't really care about what happened then because I already knew what happened. Anyway, I kept reading. I just finished the tandem read, which I do suggest, even though it's really hard to get through just because you're going through a lot of points of views. I like counted it. I think it's like 10 points of views that you're flipping back and forth to, which can be like confusing and kind of like defeating when you're like so invested in one person's story, and then you have to flip to another person's story, and then you have to read like 6 or 7 other people's stories to get back to the one that you're really excited about reading. But that one I didn't technically read this year. I finished it on like the 1st or 2nd of the year, but it didn't count in my 24 books I've read. But this is probably my favorite thing I've read this year. I wanted to end on a high note because I've loved it so much. I actually like did some numbers. I've read over 7,464 pages, like roughly that amount of just Sarah J. Maas this year, and I'm not even done, and it has been incredible. So if anything you take from this video, please just read one of her books, read one of her series. This one is young adult. It does get adult, I believe in like book 6 or something like that. So just keep that in mind if that's not something you're into. So yeah, so thank you for watching this. If you made it this far, I kind of ranted about a lot of different things. I really enjoyed it. If there are any books I talked about that I said I didn't like and you liked, don't take it to heart. That's just my opinion on it, and I'm glad that you enjoyed whatever it was, because reading is a lot of fun. It has really kind of brightened up my life a lot, and has been a really fun hobby, and I'm really excited to see what I'll read this year. I've already started off great with, you know, the tandem read, and I'm on the last book now. So yeah, thank you for watching.